Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Robinson, your host of RevOps Unboxed, and I'm here today with Oscar Armas-Luy, Senior Director of Revenue Operations at Beeline. We are super excited today to have a discussion all about being the first hire in RevOps. But first, before we dive into it, I'd like to introduce Oscar. Oscar, thank you for being here today. And maybe you can give our guests a little bit background about yourself.
Thanks, Sandy. Super excited to be here. So my name's Oscar. I'm currently based in Philadelphia. Have lived here pretty much my whole life. And my career in RevOps has really been a little bit of everything. So I started my RevOps journey really in sales ops at SAP, which was a Fortune 500 company as part of a really big organization there, and did a couple of different roles from the analyst to the business partner level. Then I went to a smaller company called Phenom, which was a VC-backed unicorn startup. So I got to live the startup life there. And now I'm at Beeline. Beeline is a 20-year-old private equity-owned high-growth organization. And I'm having a ton of fun here. And I always like to tell people that one of the things I think is really special that I've been lucky to experience is getting to see the public company, the VC-backed company, and now the PE-owned growth company.
That's definitely quite a journey, and that gives you a great perspective and I think appreciation for different aspects of your job, in different stages and different types of organizations. I did get a chance to meet one of your team members when we were in New York, so I thought that was really cool and got to see you speak there. Tell me a little bit about your team that you currently have at Beeline.
Yeah, so there's really three different, I say, sub functions that roll in. So of course we have sales ops, rev ops, right? Somewhere kind of in between both of the formal definitions. We have enablement, which is run by Patricia Peral, whom you met in New York, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really strong function for us. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit, but there's always debate about whether enablement belongs in RevOps or sales ops or elsewhere. Rather than take like a really firm philosophical stance, I'll say that I think it works really well for us and where we are as an organization. And then we also have our Salesforce and our sales tools and technology team. So this is the team that does all of our dev work in Salesforce, all of our config, and really all of the apps that plug into it. So that's a super important team for us. And then what's a little bit unique, but not that unique, is I also have our SDR function that rolls up to me under a really strong leader named Jamie Miller, who's here in Philadelphia as well.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. So first of all, I'm kind of the same mindset as you, like particularly around enablement. We can dive more into it. It really depends on the company, the size, and also the leader, right? If you have a background in sales and enablement, sometimes it makes sense, or if you really get it and you're passionate about it, it might make sense in your organization. But at a minimum, there needs to be a partnership. But what I wanted to drill down on is the SDR function. So I share that with you at a prior organization. I also led the SDR function because in our case, it was a challenge. It was like, where do they report to as a small team? And they weren't getting the love and attention from the sales leaders because they were too busy worrying about AEs and closing deals. And marketing they kind of didn't feel like part of the team in marketing. So it made more sense for me to run them. And I had a sales background. So tell me about that a little bit and how that came to be and what your thoughts there just in general around the SDR function.
Yeah, so I'm super bullish on the SDR function. I think that done right, it is critical to the growth, especially in for SaaS organizations. I think there's a couple things right. I think much like your situation, this was a team that really needed a home that could help them reach their full potential. And I see that sort of from two sides. So on the one hand, for us, we needed a lot of the fundamentals of play put in. So a lot of the things that SDR organizations take for granted in terms of process, expectations, and tooling, we simply didn't have, just because, we just never had the opportunity to put it in place um, over the years. So I think number one, it was a lot of putting in a lot of the fundamentals of play. And then I think number two, which is kind of interesting, is then you think about, okay, it's not just about the impact that you can have on the SDR organization in isolation. It's important, but it's also how do you create sort of trickle impacts, or ripple effects throughout the organization. And the SDR organization, being the first RevOps hire, has also been an opportunity for me to see hands on, okay, how are things going to work when they hit the field, when I'm responsible for it, when I'm actually on the front lines before you roll it out to sales, CS, and other teams.
That makes a lot of sense, and you can help, especially if you get some scrappy SDRs in there that can kind of help you build it, right? Like
Yes.
they're really great with the tools. They become your subject matter experts, help you improve things. So I think it's a win-win for the company, and sounds like you've set it up with that in mind for future success. So tell me a little bit about being the first RevOps hire at an organization, because I think that's a lot of companies, and I've been in this situation a couple times where even if, especially if they're VC or PE backed, where they say, hey, you need to hire RevOps, and the company says, what's RevOps, right? And then they put a job out there, and then they hire you, and then you come in and you've got to figure it out, right? You've got to teach people, you've got to stand up the function. So I think this is common, and I think people would love to hear about your experience and thoughts on that.
Yeah, so first of all, Sandy, I think you're spot on in terms of how these roles get created. In my experience, a lot of these first RevOps roles, it's someone got a job description from uh, their VC, their PE firm, or a peer or a board member, and they kind of just rolled with it. So, I think that the first step in really evaluating any opportunity to be the first RevOps hire is really figuring out what they're looking for and what they need. And those two things, in my experience, typically aren't the same. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, typically everybody's on the same page about what results they want to drive. Typically, it's some variation of bookings or ARR or NRR. But the way they think is going to get there is kind of um, detached from perhaps what you could land on if you had the data and if you actually had the process in place to get there. So I think figuring out those two is kind of the first step.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when these leaders are hiring for these jobs, and I've seen this in people that I've talked to at conferences and on the pod, is they take a job, and the CRO or chief sales or whoever hired them thought it was a sales ops job, and it's like, hey, do commissions, do this, and not thinking about the full customer journey, right? So I don't know if you have any thoughts or insights on that, but that's kind of what I've seen is you're getting applying for a job that may have said RevOps, but it's really a sales leader needing a sales ops job.
Yeah. So I think definitely this happens, right? And sales ops is a perfectly good, extremely important, I would actually say great role, right? But
Mm-hmm.
what stinks is when you think you're taking a RevOps job, but it's really a sales ops job. So I think a lot of it falls to how that leader sees the role, how that leader sees the pains in the organization. But also, I think a lot of it has nothing to do with us necessarily. A lot of times it's about the broader organization, like where the silos exist, where the sacred cows exist, um, kind of historically how organizations have worked together. I think the true difference between RevOps and sales ops is RevOps' ability to bridge the silos across the different
Mm-hmm.
functions. And sometimes you can do everything right, but the organization just won't let you. So I think my advice really, when you're trying to figure out, especially as a first RevOps hire, you want to be able to talk to different functional leaders and see how they see their relationship with your role. So one of the questions that I love to ask in interviews is, how will my role serve you, or how will my role add value to your team? I think it's a very non-confrontational question. I think it's a very positive question that can really reveal just how closely people see themselves working with you.
I love that. Can you say that again so people can write that down?
Yeah, I always ask people, how will my role add value to your team?
Perfect, perfect. I think that is a genius question because it really gets deep into what they think of how the role should be and how you should interact, and and then you don't get things like stay in your lane, right? Why are you talking to the operations person? Those kind of things, where because I think of RevOps is driving revenue,
Hmm.
and even I think in the interview process, doing a level of teaching, this is how I see the function laying out. If I were to take this job and build out RevOps in your organization, are we aligned? How does this look to you? Is this something that, and here's why we would care about this. So I think having the ability to communicate that, because taking a new gig is a huge step, right? And if you step into the wrong role at that point, it can be frustrating, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I want to add, right? Once you're in the seat, I think it's important to remember that people will have their own ideas, their own stories about why you're there. And most of them will be totally untrue, right? So I'll give you an example. Like when I've stepped into new roles, I've seen and I've heard, I've caused a lot of anxiety in people just by asking questions.
Mhm.
And I'm sitting here scratching my head, going, "Well, I'm just trying to learn. I'm just trying to understand that. Hey, I just never heard of that before. I wanted to know what it was." And what I found was that because people had all kinds of different stories, like, "Oh, he's coming to figure out what jobs we can cut," or "Oh, he's coming to figure out like whose commission plan he can screw up." People form their own stories, and it informs how they act with you, how open they are to collaborating. And so what I've taken is, so first of all, I think awareness of that is important. But then what do you do with that? I work really hard, especially when I'm working with newer folks that join the organization, or folks, that have been around that I just don't work that closely with. I really try to level set why I'm here, why I'm asking, what I hope to do. And most of the time, what I hope to do is nothing, because I'm just in the learning phase. And I find that when
Mhm.
you can do that, people are a lot more open to really letting you be the revenue ops person and collaborating, versus having their guard up.
It's the classic what's in it for them,
Hmm.
right? So as you work with them, understand their needs, and I always tell people we teach salespeople how to sell. We have to have our own discovery and our own way of collaborating, and getting this internal collaborative, almost buy-in, right, on kind of what's happening. And a lot of times when you do go to these folks, or they just fear change, right, or
Hmm.
they fear, like, ultimately the underlying issue is, I'm scared my world is going to change. I'm scared my job's going to change, and I'm potentially scared I might lose my job. So this is, I try to keep that in my mind when working with people, and then ultimately I want to build things that make them successful. Right? I mean, that's why we're here.
Yeah, I think fear, that's the key word that stuck out to me there. It's throughout my career, I think it's been a journey of, I think aligning myself to people's interests and what they care about has come naturally. What has not
Hmm.
come naturally is doing that in the face of fear or anxiety or worry. That's very valid, because, I felt it too in different times in my career. And so I think it's always a journey of just having that empathy, keeping that in mind, but also keeping your eye on the vision.
Definitely. So as you came in to Beeline, being the first hire, and kind of got your footing, how did you start with figuring out how to structure your team? What was the order of operations? I mean, how'd you approach that?
Yeah, so I think, I started and then I took a step back. So when I first joined, I started by just saying, okay, here are all the RevOps basics, and here is the sprint to put them in place. Right, things like pipeline reviews, pipeline inspections, um, dashboarding, scorecards, you name it. But then I took a step back, and what I realized was the so-called fundamentals that I'm trying to put in place. A lot of this is foreign to the folks that I'm working with. That's not their fault. That's not bad. That's not good. It just is, right? Because if you've never had someone to show it to you, like I think there's a lot of RevOps educational content now, but even 2 years ago, like a lot of this stuff was pretty obscure. So I took a step back, I put the brakes on, and I said, okay, I need to do a lot more learning about A, where the organization is today, and then B, which of these are sort of the least disruptive, highest impact changes, right?
Mm.
And where I really landed on is that there was a lot that we could do on sales tools and technology, right? The tools that we had were being underutilized. Things were maybe configured in ways that didn't make sense anymore in the current state of the organization, or things were configured in ways that, kind of nobody remembered why we did it that way. So, what I really put my focus on to start is okay, how do I structure my team around the best use of sales tools and technology? And I want to be careful here, right? Because a lot of RevOps folks, they say, I don't want to be stuck being the tech stack person or the tools person or the reporting person. And I think that's very valid, but I do think it's a means to an end, right? Saying that, and we talked about this fear, saying that you're coming in to look at a process or a tool or improve utilization, I think is a very low risk, low fear way to talk to people and learn and really start to poke and prod at the process than just coming in gung ho and saying, I'm going to rebuild something. So to that end, that's really where I thought about, okay, how do we get sales tools and technology under the RevOps umbrella? And then also, how do we get enablement, right? Because a lot of the problems
Mm-hmm.
weren't just with the tools, but with how people understood the tools and the fact that the tools didn't really sit in anyone's day-to-day workflows, right? And so I
Mm.
thought that a really strong enablement person could help us define that.
I love that. And that's a big win for the teams using the tools because if you ask any marketing person, salesperson, or customer success, those are some of the big administrative frustrations. And a lot of times that just leads to maybe the tool didn't have the right integration set up. Maybe it just needs to be refined a little bit. Maybe there's some new functionality in the tool that was never set up
Yeah.
that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, and the example that comes to mind too is like I had a sales rep, and we laugh about it now, that said to me, Salesforce exists for our private equity owners, right? It's not for me. It's so that they can come and poke in and see what we're doing. Um, and what I thought to them is I said, I have an opportunity here, right? It is my job to show you and make Salesforce work for you, not the other way around. And so we kind of really collaborated on that and kind of understanding their worldview, why they felt that way. And I think we were able to make a couple of changes that helped us round the corner. And it's an everlasting journey, right? But I think that we could sometimes get frustrated and say, oh, like if people just use the tool. But I think we remember
Hmm.
that we have a great opportunity in RevOps to help people get there and deliver value at the same time.
Exactly, exactly. And the having that just be easy for them when they log in, I think is critical. And I'm in an organization that's almost 20 years old, and some of the folks have been there for a while. And I have people that still write, handwrite things down, and that's why they're not putting it in the CRM. And so we have HubSpot. So I built a playbook into HubSpot. When I had my amazing administrator build the playbook in HubSpot, and the person the other day at a meeting proactively said, and this is the person that when we first rolled it out was like, well, I write things down, and I just not going to use your playbook type of thing. And then this person said in the other meeting, well, I thought I'd give it a try, and I hate to admit this, but it made it so much easier to use it. And now I know where to find it. And what this person didn't realize was it was tied to the deal that they were working on. And even though we did multiple trainings and stuff, it wasn't until like they finally kind of drank the Kool-Aid and jumped in and tried it. And so but it really did, like, my goal was to just truly make it easier, not to, yeah, we need to capture the field inputs and stuff like that, but it was like, how can I make this easier, have it all in one place so their lives are easier and save you time.
I love that. And what you make me think of is like one of the reasons I love Beeline, but I think tech in general, I don't know, maybe that's a generalization, but one of the reasons I love Beeline is that everybody really wants to do a good job. Everybody
Mhm.
wants to be excellent. And I think that takes you a long way because you can take a step back and you could say, like, oh, so and so doesn't want to write notes in the CRM because they're lazy or whatever. Then you take a
Mhm.
step back and you're like, no, this person wants to be excellent at their job. They're just not
Mhm.
seeing how this gets them to excellence. And my job
Yep.
is to paint that path.
That is a great way to look at it, because that's exactly, the easiest way to take that, when you roll out something you think it's cool and they're like, "Well, I write it down by hand." It's like, "Well, I haven't taught them the why or the how it's going to make their, why they should just try it, and approach it a little bit differently." So, that's always important, in that underlying reason, why are you doing the thing? I hate the box checky thing, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's just that's just frustrating. I was a salesperson and I thought it was the most ridiculous thing, like, write this whole list of things or check all these boxes and no one's ever going to read it. So how do you find that balance with your teams? And, from a RevOps perspective, obviously we need to build our reports because we need to provide board updates and do all the things that we do. But how do you find that balance when you're, rolling things out and working with your teams?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I keep in mind, right, is there's sort of a human bias when we want to improve something that we always think
Hmm.
about what can I add. But a lot of times you can improve things by by subtraction. So
Hmm.
I try to flip the bias on its head, and I always try to approach problems by what can I subtract. So subtract can be very literal, meaning can I take any fields away to make room for a new field or for a new process step, right? But it can also be a little bit more abstract where you say, okay, I need to do this new thing or I need to capture this new data point. Is there a way that I can combine it with one that I'm already capturing? Or is there a way that I can tweak one to make it a little bit richer? So I think always approaching things by what can I subtract is a really good way to strike a balance. And you're not always going to be able to subtract things, right? But for the first couple of years, I think most people find that they will be able to. So I think that's a big idea that helps.
I like that because nobody wants to hear things are being added, right? So, or at least you're net neutral. Like,
Hmm.
hey, we're adding this, but we took away these four things, right? Or this one thing that was annoying you guys. And I think that's important too, because if listening to the people and how they're using the tools, when they come up with an objection in the field consistently. So are you touching base with your team and collecting their feedback in different ways? How are you engaged there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two ways I do it, right? So there's explicit feedback collection, which is just asking, hey, what do you think about this? Or how has this been going? Or what is on your mind about this? I think that's a little bit of an art, but we need to make sure that we do it consistently. I'll tell you right now, I'm not happy with how often I do it. And that's something that I'm working on doing more frequently and more naturally. I think the other thing is sort of implicit feedback collection. So we talked about subtraction. I usually don't ask people before taking things away because I think it kind of triggers the human feeling of like loss aversion. So typically, what I do is I will try to make fields invisible or remove them from the page layout and you're in Salesforce and make them hard to find and see what
Mhm.
happens. Sometimes what has happened is I've immediately gotten a ping like 30 minutes later, like, hey, where did this go? And I said, okay, let me dig into what this person is using it for and turn it into a conversation. But other times I've had taken things off the layout and it's been months and no one said anything. So I said, oh, subtraction. And I didn't have to, you know, really explain or have those kind of conversations about what was going away. So I think my key is I think most people ask for explicit feedback. I would challenge us all to look for ways to get implicit feedback like that as well to
Mm,
really round out the perspective.
I love that. Just looking at the data, if they're not using it anyway, they're not going to miss it. It's going to clean up their view. They're going to have a more pleasant experience. And I think that is, I think everybody's CRM gets clunky at some point because different leaders want to add a custom field for this or a custom field for this. And pretty soon you have all these things that aren't being used. So I think that's a great way to approach it. It's just look in your system what's not being used and they won't miss it. No need to alarm everybody either, right? Never send the alarm bells. We're taking this away, and
Mhm.
then it's like, oh no, right? The world is ending. Everything's on fire. RevOps is ruining everything. That never
Yeah,
happens.
absolutely. And look, I want to bring this up because it's the topic of the day, right? In many circles, like I think we run sort of the same risk with AI, right?
Mm,
Everything is AI now. Everything seems like it's rolling out AI features. Heck, Beeline's own product is rolling out AI
mm-hmm,
features. But I think we want to make sure that, like all technology, we're really grounding it in what's going to be useful and avoiding making it clunky just because leaders want to check the AI box. Um,
mm,
so what I've been doing is, okay, the ship has sailed on the CRM, kind of, right? Because I'm dealing with 10 plus years of stuff before I even got there. So we do what we
mm-hmm,
can with it. But I want to make
mm-hmm.
sure that with AI and with these new technologies, we're really doing it right from the get go and being really discerning about what we add, what we roll out. So it's funny because these conversations I get in, they're all about how can we do more with AI, whereas I'm thinking about how do we do the right stuff with AI.
Right. You have to be strategic about that. And, I always look at the current tools. Like you said, Beeline is making enhancements. All of the tools that we use from a RevOps perspective are trying to do something. So there may be something you can optimize strategically without going out and buying a bunch of shiny bells and
Hmm.
whistles to try to check the AI box. So, as we wrap up here, I just wanted to, you've said a lot of really great things in terms of, setting up your team and how to approach it and questions even to ask on the interview. What do you think is, if I'm a listener, what do I walk away with from this conversation? Do you have any, tips or anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'd like to say is that, when we talk about RevOps, we talk about silos, we talk about organizational dynamics, we talk about organizational conflicts. As a good RevOps pro, you have the ability to influence that, but you do not have the ability to control it. And so I think that a lot of times you can get in ruts where we say, oh, like I'm trying to do everything in my power, or I'm trying to do my job, or I'm trying to get what the organization needs done, but the organization is just not allowing it, or the machinery is just not allowing
Mm,
it, or even this particular leader is not allowing it. And I think the art of the job is being able to know what can I influence? And if I can influence, how do I go around it? How do I find the workaround? How do I get the result anyway? And so,
mm,
how do we make that practical? I think it's always having the how can we mindset when you're in an organization. Not it can't, but how can we? And then when you're interviewing or when you're looking at organizations, figuring out, okay, what are the organizational dynamics, the organizational tides that are going to work for and against me? And does that play to my strengths? And if it doesn't, then it's not the right fit for you.
I love that. And that's like some basic foundational Stephen Covey, your circle of influence versus your circle of control, which your influence is bigger. And don't drive yourself nuts about it, right? So you run into those blockers, find the workarounds, but focus on the goals and the objectives in the organization and really being true to yourself.
I love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining the show today. I really appreciate having you as a guest, and I'm sure we'll be collaborating soon. We'll see you next time, Oscar. Thanks for
Thank you.
coming. This has been another episode of RevOps Unboxed in partnership with the Revenue Operations Alliance. Until next time, keep unboxing.